Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to take a look at fixing a bunch of issues and then implementing the upvote and downvote mechanics, right? So like dislike and whatnot, as well as a user page. So let's go ahead and get started. We are going to start with fixing a bunch of stuff. So first of all, just the stuff that I missed in the comment creation context. What we do here is if we are unable to find the thing that we're commenting on, we are throwing an error. And when we actually go into the comment controller to, create the comment, we don't actually do anything around catching this error and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and just put a try catch around here. Make sure that we catch this specific parent not found exception. Let's put the E here and return a bad request, or not the base model. Can't see anything because of the presentation thing. Bad request e dot message, and there we go. Right, so we just return the message, and once we get around to making the pop-up, we are going to handle all like bad request conditions and stuff like that. Next thing is the user header. So what was my beef with the user header? So the append thing, if we go to a trick, you can see that we don't really have too much control over this appending thing. Sometimes we want it big, sometimes we want it small, maybe we want to change the color, etc. So this bit right here isn't really working for me, so I'm gonna go ahead and delete this, and instead we're gonna have a slot which we are going to name append, right? So we append something on the end. Reverse is still going to stay, append we're going to remove that. And anywhere where we use append, we will now need to, fix the thing. So let's go ahead, Control-Shift-F, and we're gonna look in the directory of our web client, and we're gonna search for user header. So wherever we're using it, right? So let's go ahead, bring this in where we were using this append right here. Let's go ahead and put a template in here. And the slot append, and here we can just put some text span created by, or yeah, I think that's fine. Let's put some of this text here, remove the append, move the reverse back, and yeah, mostly this created by is completely fine. I think it should show up there later, but yeah, for now we'll just leave it. So the other thing, so this one is showing up on the comment body. We don't actually have anything on the comment. We could probably add the date there, but I will leave it for now as it's such a small thing. Next thing is on the submission. So this is where we actually have the created date in use here. So let's go ahead and just get the template in here again. Slot append, pop this back on the previous line. Let's get a span in here, and let's get the date. Let's remove the append. We will put the date in here. And let's just put a class of, I don't know, I think caption, and you do text color and text color, right? So this should make this a little bit smaller, yeah, and there it is. So let me refresh that. So created by, smaller, a gray text. I mean, that doesn't look great to me. Maybe it was text gray. Maybe gray is spelled with an E. I'm not sure. Let's not guess, and let's check with the Vuetify documentation. So let's go for colors. So yeah, so it's color -- text if we want to do it with the text, and let's check, what was it? Gray with an E. Right. So I just don't know how to spell, right? So gray text, and there we go, right? So it's a little bit darker. It's not the primary thing that we want to see. The time format, it's like a whatever kind of thing. I'm not a designer, so I get to use the excuse. Another thing, if we go on the moderation page, actually, yeah, that's like pops us back on there. Okay, never mind. I will just show you what the problem was, and we will fix it regardless. We don't actually need to look at it. So at the moment, what we're doing is the way that we're loading the comments for the moderation item. I appreciate I'm scrolling around, but The mod item actually contains the comments, but for the actual comment section itself, the comment section is loading the comments regardless of the moderation item. What happens in the moderation item controller when we load, you can see here we're including the comments. So let's go ahead and remove the comments that we're including, and in the projection where we are setting these comments here, let's go ahead and remove that as well, right? So we just we don't need to drag these comments with us. They will get loaded regardless. Closing all of that, another thing to take a look at is the comment component. So we've spent like a minuscule amount of time putting the started property or attribute into the component, and that was meant to be to indicate that we have started the feed, and we just didn't implement it. So for this reason, all right, if the content length is 0, that might indicate that there is just no replies, and that would just keep displaying the button. So we actually want to indicate something that has started the feed. So, and we've just left that out. So that, well, not we, I. So we just want to make sure that we have this started in here, right? That we're using here. So if this started, don't allow to load any replies anymore, right? And I think another example was right here. Again, load more if we have started, display the thing and check that it's not finished. And by the way, you can see it's a writer is underlying all of this stuff. It's because I checked that if it was like a regular object that we're exporting here and not a function, it would have no problem. But for some reason, it's struggling when this is a function. But can't have everything. The other issue that we had, if I can quickly get back to localhost 3000. Let's go on to backflip. Let's get our console open, and I will get a comment in. All right, let's just sign in. I think this issue would have been apparent in the previous episode when we were working on comments, but essentially, if I do a little test here, right, the HTML part is no problem. The real problem is if I reload this. Let me just clear this console here. And I load the comments. If we take a look at the preview, you can see that the content itself is null. So it's not really that important because we're just setting the HTML. However, it may indicate that something's wrong because on the comment view model, we are indeed retrieving and putting this into the view model. So it's null for some reason. So it's just null in the comment. So we want to preserve that in case we change the way that we render comments in the future. So for the comment creation context, this is the bit where I identified the issue. We create the comment and then we just set the initial content to the content. So we just need to make sure that we set it from the comment form onto the content. So that was that issue. Now we can go ahead and implement a couple of features, a few easy ones. So let's go ahead and just go into not the user view model, but user controller. I thought it was time to display a page. So where we had this ID right here, when we're going to be displaying pages, we're going to be doing it off a username. So we're not going to be allowing any spaces or any like crazy characters. So it can nicely go into the URL, right? So let's just have the username here and let's return some of this stuff. So what was it doing? Context, users, where. We'll say username equals username, and we can do something like actually equals username string comparison invariant culture ignore case just in case. And then we will do something like select, and then actually we had user view models, and what did we have? We had a flat projection. So the flat projection won't work exactly unless we include an ID on here. So user ID, because when we are if we go to a user page and we want to see their submissions, we're actually doing it off by a user ID. Okay, so we will need to include the user ID in here, and I don't mind having it on a flat projection. I am thinking about regarding getting this loading, what is it doing? Just a second, I don't know. Loading the submissions alongside here, but then it's gonna make us, we are gonna have to handle the cursoring and stuff like that. So I think just load it separately. It shouldn't be that big of a problem. Okay. So once we got that, let's go ahead and just return an object here, and we're just going to select, no, not select, first our default. Okay, so this should get us our user. Once we got that, let's go ahead into actually the web client, into the pages folder. And in the pages folder, in the profile bit, let's go ahead and create a new view file, and actually not create a new one. Let's just copy the index file, and we'll just work off there because it already has most of the stuff that we need. Let's go ahead and name it _username. And yeah, I keep seeing this thing up there. If anyone can tell me what that is, speak up. Right, so we got a bunch of stuff in here. What do we want to keep? What do we want to get rid of? So primarily the bit right here where we're kind of doing some editing and stuff like that, all the logic regarding that, we can go ahead and remove in the profile. No longer gets loaded from the auth store for the currently logged in user. This is just going to be loading a user, okay? So we will have to have something like a fetch clause, right? Because we might want to be able to pre-render this. Do we want to guard this for authentication? Maybe, probably not. Right, so let's go ahead and get a const username from this route params, right? And then we want to go ahead and load the user. So this, let's go ahead, say user, or rather profile. I think that will be okay because we're already kind of using the profile to display it. So I think we can just keep using that. So this profile, let's go ahead and wait this Axios call where we do a get. And in here we can do API users, and what user do we get? We get a username user. If we need to interchange this between an ID and a username, again, we can do a sort of the same thing as we did in the tricks controller for getting a specific trick, either by ID or by the slug. So the thing that we did here, okay, but we're not there yet. So here we will get the user that will get loaded into the profile. I appreciate there is not too much there just yet. So which ones of these do we actually need, and what can we get rid of? So at the moment, I think just having this vAvatar right here with the MDI account, so disable the upload image. I think if all of this can pretty much go, disabled, click ref, yeah, all of this can go. And actually that looks hold up, what are we doing? That looks like a goddamn user header, right? Am I right? I think I'm right. So user header, let's go ahead, put the user header here, because I mean, the pages, they don't have too much of them. All right, I don't think we're going to be appending anything. So username, let's go ahead, grab the username, and image URL, let's grab the user image. All right, so if we got the profile, I think, can we put this here? Will it be happy? So here, let's actually, we'll keep this open in case we need to fix this. I think the user header, it will be, if we go onto the index page of the profile itself, I think it might be a little bit harder to manipulate this with a user header because all kinds of different things are going on here. So I think we can actually leave it as is here, but when we're just displaying, that should be fine. So, I mean, what's next? What I wanted to do is I actually want to navigate to this thing. So let's go into the user header, and primarily if I click in the area of the, what's it called, the icon itself, not the icon, the profile image or the text, I want to be able to jump to that user's page. Right, so let's go ahead into where we had, not enum, assets and main.css. We will do something like a class called pointer. We can do it on hover, name this whatever you want, but essentially something that has this class, if I mouse over it, I want a pointer cursor. All right, so let's just do this, and that's it, right? Some things I want to be able to link to, some things I don't want to be able to link to. Let's go ahead and just put another prop here. We'll say link, and we will enable it by default. So let's say required false, type boolean, default true. Okay, so what the link will do is, let's go ahead, grab a div, wrap all this stuff, and here I think we will need, yeah, so all of this drops down. Let's just deflex and align center. Let's grab these two. I think, yeah, so we got the same thing. What we want to do is when we have the link prop, we want to be able to click on this, right? So let's go ahead and bind the class, which we will say pointer, I think. Did I name it pointer? Pointer, yeah, I named it pointer. And if link, bind the pointer. Next thing is I want an on-click function, so let's get a methods in here, and we'll say go to user, and we'll say this dot router, where we want to go, a push function, right? Push function, and where do we go? We go to profile slash, and we provide the username. So let's go ahead and say this dot username, just like that. I think, does this return anything? What is this? This returns a promise, so that's okay. Let's just return this so it's not dangling. When we navigate to this, so the only time that we actually want to navigate to this if this is linked, right? Otherwise, just disable this and skip this, right? So if link, actually make the thing work, otherwise don't, right? Let's grab this function, let's go ahead and bind it here. So on click, boom, go to user, cool. So now you can see I can hover over this stuff anywhere where I want to disable going to the user, I can. So there we are, you can see we go to profile test. Let's see what actually happens. So you can see the thing that we're calling to the API is with an object. So let's go ahead back to the username and let's take a look at what we're actually passing here. Users a username, so users object, so username is an object, and that's because we're just assigning it. We're not actually deconstructing the username parameter. Another thing that I noticed right here is we're grabbing the profile from the store. That is no longer happening. The profile comes from the profile in the data here. So right, if we refresh this, I cannot read property ID of null, right? Because, well, the thing is, we can't, right? So let's just go ahead and put the VF around the top level statement. It might actually not be correct view syntax or console. Yeah, so I think that's just a little bit out of control there. Okay, so let's go ahead and give this a refresh. Let's see what happens. What's wrong? Okay, so that's a 401. So that might not actually be any problem with Vue.js. That's an actual problem with not being able to grab a specific user page. So let's go ahead and just allow anonymous. I will have another think around, do we want to be able to allow this to be grabbed anonymously? So the user submissions and the user itself, right? So let's give this a refresh. Profile username, so none of these are bound. So let's go to the username. You can see here I'm just, writing out as if it's text. Let's go ahead and actually bind the things. And there we go, right? Let's go ahead, take the VIF right here, put it on the top component here. Give this a refresh and the stuff still works. So I'm pretty confident we can remove that. Just like that. So now anywhere where we want to go to a user, we can. It's maybe worth checking if we're on the page and stuff like that. But for now, this is more or less what I wanted to do. If we want to disable it, we can do something like link is false, right? So this, for example, will no longer be a link because we're kind of on here. And this could probably disable the link here somehow as well. But for now, it doesn't matter so much. Now, the actual juice of the tutorial, which I wanted to do, is the whole voting thing. So let's collapse all of this. Let's go into the models, and we're going to go into the submission vote. We're going to create an abstraction for the vote. So the vote, it will be a base model of integer. And what we're going to do is we're going to say a vote belongs to a user, right? So a user can always vote, kind of thing, right? And then the submission vote, we can go ahead and replace this with a vote. And then for the moderation review, I actually noticed that this doesn't have any indication of what user is voting for it. So we'll just take the advantage here and kind of drag the review along with us while we're fixing this up. And as we set this here, we can go into the moderation item controller and at the bottom here where we do all the review stuff, right? We want to, on the review, grab the user ID and we want to set the user ID. If we don't have the user ID, jump to the top of the controller, remove the API controller tag and just inherit from the API controller, which is our base controller class. And now we get authorization and stuff like that. So all of this should pretty much allow visiting except for actual reviewing, which should be done by moderators. So let's go ahead and say tricking library constants, policies, and moderator, right? So only the moderator can actually go ahead and create reviews. Now that this part is done, that was just like a quick little fix up. On the submission vote itself, what we're going to do is we're going to introduce a integer of value, right? So what kind of value does this have, like 0, 1, or -1 or whatnot? So it depends on how do we actually want to keep track of a score or a vote or something like that, right? So the value bit, let's go ahead into the API over here. So this is no longer just going to be a count because we can either downvote or upvote. Let's go into the view models here. We're going to go into the submission models, and where we have the upvotes, let's go ahead and rename this to score. We are then going to rename the upvotes to votes. Okay, we're going to say this is as queryable, and I think we can just sum the value, and that should be okay. So this should execute it and count star or whatever the SQL statement is. Maybe it's just a sum statement as well. That's going to calculate all of the score. What the actual other thing that we want to do is actually give it a little bit of perspective. So like, you know, if you're on Instagram and you go back on Instagram after you've liked something, the page reloads, but as you scroll back to your post or you load your YouTube video, you can already see, have you voted on this previously? And the thing will be lit up in blue or whatever. We kind of want to get that perspective as well, right? So if you're a signed in user, you're gonna have perspective around, you know, if you have been interacting with this post before or not. And let's go ahead and create a static, same expression, and we'll do perspective projection. Okay, we'll do string user ID here. And what we will do is we'll say if string is null or empty, user ID. So if it's null or empty, let me actually scroll down here a little bit. We'll just return the projection because that's what it is, right? Now the other thing that we want to do, and this is unfortunately I couldn't find a better way around it, because basically what we can't do is we can't take this expression and extend the anonymous type that we return here, because the C# stores anonymous types at compile time, okay, and registers them. So this would require a lot, really a lot of work to get a mechanism that could potentially extend the anonymous type. So we would have to create our own dynamic types using reflection. It would be slow. It would not be a good experience, right? So that being said, what we do is we return the same submission Just don't leave the S off. There we go. And the real thing that we want to do is we want to grab the votes, or maybe even not the votes, the vote. So on the submissions, there are going to be a couple of votes, and we want to just say as queryable, or actually is it as query? Yeah, it says queryable. We will select. We'll select the value. We'll say first or default. Let's drop this down a little bit. And one more time. Let's just not forget to say user ID equals user ID, right? So for which user are we actually getting this? Let's not forget to add a comma. And there is our new query. If it is a user, maybe there is going to be a little bit more perspective in the future where it's going to justify having its own lambda, right? But anyway, just understand that if you update this, you will need to potentially update this as well, right? So unfortunately now you just have to update a thing in two places if there is one change, okay? So usually something like that indicates a problematic code, but that's what we'll have to live with for now. So let's go into where do we have submissions. So in the trick controller, we are getting submissions from multiple places, aren't we? So we might want to you know, do something about maybe consolidating it as well into submissions themselves. So we'll take a look at it. All right, so perspective projection, user ID, cool. There is a little bit of work that we'll need to do around this. So for now, another thing that we'll just leave it for now here. What we'll do is we will implement the controller that actually accepts the vote. We'll link it up, and then we'll look through what we actually need to do in order to get a user ID into here, okay? Let's go straight to the bottom. Let's just copy this function here, and actually not on here. Let's delete this. Let's go into the submissions controller, because that is where we update and stuff. Let's get the put, because it's going to be a set or update kind of function, right? So in here, we're going to have an ID for the submission, and then we're just going to say vote. And we're going to say vote here. From body, I don't think we'll need that. We can just say int ID and int vote. This can be really simple. If the vote is or doesn't equal -1 and the vote doesn't equal 1, that means it doesn't fall into one of the categories that we want, either a downvote or an upvote, right? The 0, 1, we will, once you voted, we're not going to let you take your vote back. You will either have to go on full on revert or not, right? But otherwise, we just want to return a bad request here. Let's go ahead and turn this into an iAction result. At the end, we'll just return OK. There doesn't need to be any updates or anything like that. We will just say grab the vote from the database, right? So submission votes, first or default. What do we want? What do we want? We want where the submission ID equals ID. And let me drop this to a new line. I don't think that will matter too much, but the user ID equals user ID. Let's not forget, I think somewhere at the top here, maybe where we update. Yep. So we want this to be a user at least. So this, in order to vote, you need to be a user. All right. The vote, let's rename this to submission vote. Okay. Submission ID int submission ID. Let's take a look at the submission ID. It's a string for some reason, because if we take a look at the submission itself, it is actually a base model with an integer. So let's set this back to integer. Let's go back to submissions controller, semicolon. So we'll get the submission vote. If the submission vote is null, that means we don't have it. That means go ahead and add it. All right. So context, add a new submission vote, where the things that we want to happen is the submission ID will equal ID, and the user ID will equal user ID, so the person that's voting. Let me scroll down a little bit. And the value itself, so vote, let's actually rename vote to value. Just like that, and submission vote, let's just put it back to vote, because that's what I wanted. And let's put the value here, right? Otherwise, if we do have the thing, let's just grab the vote value and override the value here. Okay, and at the end, we can just await context save changes async, right? So I apologize, I'm like writing like right at the bottom where you can't, probably a little bit hard to see. Let's put the comma here, right? So an authorized endpoint, so only if you're signed in, you can up and down. We get the current one if there is one. If there isn't one, we add one with the value. Otherwise, we update the value and save the changes. Let's just actually make sure that it compiles. So now that we have most of the stuff, let's go ahead, close all of this. We'll go into the submission itself, and let's go ahead and work on displaying some of this stuff, right? Let's go ahead, grab this thumb up. We'll make the one that's down here. We'll put the score in the middle. Let's take a look at how this looks. This is 0 there, 0 there. Let me give this a refresh. Okay. So there it is. I think the thumbs up and thumbs down can be a little bit smaller. So let's go ahead and make them small. And another thing I think I want to do is just give it a little bit of space in between, okay? So for the span, let's just say a class, mx and 2, maybe 3 if we need a little bit more. Okay, yeah, so that actually looks all right. So if we click one, we want it to go up. If we click the other one, we want it to go down, right? So we just want to do a little, and I mean, if we have the vote, we want it to be active, right? If we've voted before. Let's implement the voting mechanic. Let's get some methods in here. We will get a vote in here, the value, and we will return this Nuxtjs. What are we doing? We're doing put. Where are we putting? We're putting to the submissions controller because, I mean, this is a submission action. This submission, submission, we're doing it for the submission ID. And what are we doing? We're doing a vote. And the thing that it's actually contained in the query. So the value we can just go ahead and supply it here as well. So just put the V in the query format here. Okay, so it's not that terrible. Let's go ahead, put the null here, and the result, I mean, I don't really care about the result. And we can actually increment this manually. First things first, let's say if it's kind of the, if the thing is the same, so submission dot value is the same as the vote or the V, let's return. So because the value is the thing that is going to get returned from the endpoint, that is the previous vote that we have made, right? Otherwise, what we're going to do is if it's a freshly thing that we've done, if we've just voted, we want to actually set the value of the submission to the value, right? Now, if we've made a vote and then we're changing it, that means the V is going to be different, but we can't just increment or decrement it because if we're voting first time, it's going to go up by 1. If we're voting a second time, it's either going to go down by 2 or up by 2, right? So we need to take care of that scenario. In this case, what we want to do is we want to just manipulate the score a little bit, where we will say if the current value is 0, that means it's the first time that we're attempting to vote, okay? And that means that we want to just go ahead and add the value, all right? Otherwise, if it's the second time, what we will do is we will multiply it by 2. So if it's +1, it's going to be 2. If it's -1, it's going to be -2, right? So we're just going to get that bounce, a little bit more pronounced bounce, all right? So let's go ahead and see what this looks like if we plus this and... oh yeah, just you know, gotta bind the stuff. On the thumb up, click, vote, 1, copy this function. On the thumb down, -1, and let's do color Let's bind color, submission, vote equals, if you have voted as -1, let's just say blue, right? So we're just gonna have a little bit of an indicator of what color it is. So let's copy this. Did I copy it? There we go. And otherwise, if it is 1, then it's blue, okay? So it depends on how we voted. So let's refresh this. Let's go ahead, give this, and we are not authorized. Okay, so I could see 2 problems there. First, it got incremented by 2, and second one, that we are not actually authorized. So let's first of all just log in, and second we'll test if the thing is actually working or not. So there we are. Let's go ahead and give this a plus. You can see that it gets incremented by 2, but however, we can't actually decrement that. Let's take a look at what is actually happening in the logic that we have here. Okay, and the thing that is actually the problem is, if we look on the submission view model, the actual vote that we should be, well, the actual thing that we're setting is the vote. And here we're looking at the value. So let's go ahead and check the vote here instead. That should be set to 0. Otherwise, I think right here we can actually set it to 0. I don't think that should be a problem. That should force us to re-sign in. So let's go ahead and do that. Right here, test password, sign in. Okay, so let's go ahead and vote again. Get the 2 problem. If we just downvote, we get the -2. Which isn't really entirely correct. Let's go ahead and take a look at it again. And I've just forgot to change the last value, right? Just grab the vote, put the value here, and there we go. Okay. So let's take a look at this again. So there's the -1. If we up it or down it, right, there we go. 1 or down, -1. Okay, there we go. And actually, let's change these. So instead of thumb, chevron, I think we can use. I think those might look a little bit better in terms of, yeah. Okay, yeah. So that's a little bit better, a little bit Stack Overflow-ish vibe here. You know, so for me, that's a little bit like, it feels a little bit more like home. So a little bit confusing. Does it work or not? Let's go ahead and get a little bit more like in terms of the perspective stuff. So program CS, let's go ahead into our first submission here. So on the backflip, test backflip, maximum height. Let's go ahead into votes, and we will give this a new list where we will have a new submission where we're gonna essentially like our own post, right? So the user ID will be the test user, and we're gonna grab the identifier. And the vote, or the value, is going to be 1, right? So a positive vote. We will need to re-sign in. So where's the maximum height? Maximum height is right here. Let's go ahead, give this a refresh. And there we go, right? So we're not signed in. Sign in. And there we go, right? So we can't actually see the blue little light. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to actually look at the traffic of the submissions, right? So for the submissions, when we send this, you will be able to notice that we don't actually send a user token, right? So even though that endpoint is trying to utilize the user ID, we don't actually send anything for it to, you know, extract the user ID from. That's why if we take a look at the data, all the votes are, you know, essentially 0, right? So this is the part where we kind of want to understand why it's not sending it, but you can pause the video here and try to figure out why you're not getting a access token there. Should be a fun challenge, but otherwise, other than that, what I'm gonna do is continue to work through this, right? So let's go into our auth store, and what we want to do with the watch user loaded is I've realized that it is created rather poorly. Made a really terrible mistake here. Well, if you can call it a mistake, but we're essentially passing a callback. and we're returning a promise. And the promise, once it's resolved, we can actually, you know, have some kind of resolution. So let's go ahead, not execute the action. We will no longer dispatch a login either, right? So we'll just do something like this. We will put the authenticated state in here and in here. Let's format this. We no longer need the dispatch, and we no longer need the action as well. And we're going to rename this to wait authentication, authenticated, right? Think, where is this? It's only finding one. Let me just grab the name because we're going to search for these and fix these, right? So watch user loaded, where is this used? In the Nuxt in auth mixins. So this guard right here, how is this going to change? In the auth, we're going to grab the wait authenticated. We're going to put it here. We're going to close it off, and then we're going to put it then in the end. Okay. And let's just have an empty function here. Right. So we're actually using it as a promise and not passing a callback into the promise like I don't know, like a silly belly or something. And what we want to do is for our feed, because the main thing that is loading our all of our stuff is the feed, right? So we want to load the page, but maybe not necessarily the feed. So what we're going to do is we're going to say wait for authentication before loading the feed. That may happen with the same thing may happen with what's it called, with the comments or any other feed that we implement, right? So let's go ahead to feed.js. Here we're gonna say wait auth. We're gonna set it to false by default, and what we're going to do is we're gonna introduce a little flag, and we'll call it enabled. Is this feed enabled, right? And we're gonna set it to false, or rather wait auth, and flip it, right? If we are, the only time that it shouldn't be enabled is if we are waiting for authentication. In that case, when the feed is created, let's go ahead and do some of this waiting, right? So this store, let's go ahead and dispatch the auth wait authenticated. And once we have finished waiting authenticated, we're gonna have some kind of thing that might load or not, but that's not the point. Where either we want to be able to confirm if the user is authenticated, send the token along, right? If the user is not authenticated, don't send the token, okay? So at this point, we just want to go ahead and say this enabled equals true, and then we want to load the content. So we just want to call this function, okay? Now, let's go ahead and return this promise here. And the one thing that we want to say, that the feed may start and the feed may start loading, but we will actually enable the, yeah, we want to perform a check here. So it can start and it can start loading, but that doesn't mean that we, you know, will actually go and perform it. So if we're not enabled, just keep exiting this loop. And once we are actually enabled, that's when we're actually going to be executed, because that's when it's, you know, that's when it's created. On the submission feed, I believe, because we have the feed here, let's go ahead and set this to true. That means that we're going to wait for authentication before displaying the feed. Okay, so let's go ahead and give this a refresh. And the submission, you can see they're now loading below here somewhere. Let's take a look at the headers and maybe one of these. Yeah. So here you can see that we're actually passing an authentication token this time. So we still don't have the thing though. So why do we not have the thing, right? Why do we not have any indication? Do we actually have anything in the data that indicates it? So let's go ahead and take a look. Right, so the vote is still 0, however, or actually, let's take a look at the second one. So the vote is still 0, right? Even if we vote on the first one and we give it a refresh, we will see that the score is there, but it's not actually indicating the vote. So the thing that's actually happening is because our feed works for both for an authenticated and unauthenticated user. let's go ahead and take a look at the, do I have the submission controller open here? No, I don't. Submission controller, and we'll just take a look at what is actually happening. Let's take a look, where was it? And not the tricks controller. Oh wait, where are we? Because we did put this on the tricks controller only. So let's go ahead and look at this in the tricks controller, and then if the issue is still persistent or not, let's take a look at it. Right. So on the backflip, you can see here, I mean, we did it too. The reason we did it too is because we could have voted, but the vote is actually still won because the logic on the back end works. The point is that we do not get an indication. So we want to know, why do we not get an indication? So on the backflip page, let's go ahead into our ID, and what we're going to do is we're just going to put a breakpoint where we get the submissions. We're going to go ahead and detach a debugger, and we're just going to take a look at what is happening. And this is the reason I'm primarily doing this is because this is kind of an investigation, like how shit's broken, how do you find out what's wrong? All right, so put a breakpoint and inspect the bridge, like your browser, your backend, somewhere in between something happens. You want to inspect it from different sides, and then you zoom in on the issue, right? So let's go ahead into the browser back here and refresh the page. So the first thing that we're going to see is that the user ID is actually populated. Now this is quite interesting because this happens during the initial load, and I was quite surprised to see this as well, because I didn't actually, never had the time to kind of realize that this is actually happening. It makes sense and I know what is happening, but like I never had the thought of working around the way that this is happening, right? So the first, with Nuxtjs specifically. So what is happening if we localhost, doesn't matter which port, it is the same domain. We've signed in on port 5000. Our cookies are still present here. So you can see the first request that we're sending is the, basically contains all the cookies, all of our authentication cookies. So when the server is making the request, so Nuxtjs server side is making requests to our backend, it actually contains all the cookies. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we might not need all this token stuff and identity server and etc. Right? That might take a little bit of refactoring to take out. I still want to be able to expose the API, so there are things to consider before we yank it out. So for now, we're just gonna leave it as is, right? In this I'd say poor state, and we're gonna ignore that the server side could be basically authenticated via cookies and that we could rely on cookie authentication. We're gonna ignore that bit for now and focus on fixing the issue of why we're not actually, and I've timed out here. Let's give this a refresh. The second call doesn't contain the user ID, even though when the second call is made, we can see that the bearer token is present. So the authorization header is present here, but we do not get the token, right? So the reason for that is if we do something like allow anonymous, or basically we do not specify anything of this sort that basically says, right, I would need you to try and authenticate the user based on extracting information from the token, right? So we could see the cookie authentication working because it is set by default with identity server authentication, or identity server authentication, where it extracts the information from the cookie, isn't enabled by default, right? So what we want to do is we want to kind of provide a dummy one. And again, I'm just going to play this out, but please keep in mind that I think we are going to switch to the cookie authentication. So we're not going to like derail this tutorial. We might have a refactoring session after this or something like that, right? In terms of the authentication. But anyway, let's go ahead and fix it. I'll show you how to fix this. Going into the startup again, I'm just going to keep it kind of in the same general area where we had the mod policy. Let's go ahead and copy this. What we're going to do is we're going to remove this and we're going to create an anonymous one. So let's go ahead and generate a property. we can just go ahead and copy it to be a moderator one. Let's pop it up here. So this is going to be our version of anonymous. Policy, add authentication schema. So identity server constants, schema, default signout schema, default cookie authentication schema. Is that what it is? I can't remember. Let's add local API authentication. Let's go into here and let's see what it says. So local API authentication schema. Cool. Which one was it? Right here. Okay, and then the policy needs at least one requirement. Anonymous requirement. Okay, and this is going to be a new class that we want to generate, right? It's gonna anonymous. I don't know how to spell anonymous clearly. There we go. Anonymous, that is how you spell it. There we go. All right, let's put this here, and we want to inherit from authorization handler. Okay, and we're going to be handling, I believe it's this one, or maybe not. We don't actually need that. Let's go ahead and implement the method that it asks us to implement. Let's just return complete task, and for the context, we're just gonna say that it is succeeded, right? And the requirement is this, right? So we're just basically giving out a free pass, but all we're doing is we're actually bringing in the authentication state in order to authorize it. But anything that's essentially has this allow anonymous authorization requirement, we're just giving it a free pass with this handler, okay? So now if we go into the tricks controller, where we had this, if we grab this authorization, put it up here, and we ask for anonymous one, we might actually see this stuff failing on the server side and succeeding on the front end side. But nevertheless, let's go ahead and see what's it called, how this is going to pan out. So let's take a look at this. You can see here that the vote is actually shown now, so we know that it's working. But for my curiosity, and I think you should be curious as well, is it going to actually still authenticate the cookie with this authorization header? So let's go ahead and refresh this. This is the first call. User ID is null. Okay, so we're not requiring that schema, so the server side is failing. And if we go a second time, is it gonna go a second time? Let's give this another good refresh. Or did I not press an F5? Something dodgy is happening. Let's double check. Nope. Okay, I'm not sure what's happening. Let me go ahead and exit the application. Seems like it is hanging. So I'll come back in just a second when I unhang this. So here I am after unclogging it, and one thing before we proceed, what I want to do is I just want to make sure that this will never trigger on server side. So what we're going to do is we're going to check this if this is, or this is a process server. We're just going to go ahead and return, okay? This should prevent any errors if they occur on the server side. Other than that, let's try to log in and give this a quick test. Apologize that this was a little bit of a messy episode, I believe. But other than that, yep, let's give this a thumbs up, thumbs down, or up and down. Let's give this a down. Let's refresh this, make sure that it's a server side rendering it. Yep, and all good, right? Yeah, one of these. Yeah. So you can see that the votes are being preserved and they are being rendered correctly with the correct, I guess, getting queried correctly. Nevertheless, this will be it for this episode. Thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy it, leave a like, subscribe. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comments section. If you're confused about that cookie stuff that we saw, yeah, do leave a comment or reach out to me on Discord. I will explain it in further details. Just make sure that it's a little bit public. So if anybody else wants to know what just happened there, can read that as well. But I also stream on Wednesdays and Sundays. Go ahead and join that if you would like to. And I'll see you in the next episode.